So we've come to a moment where anything could happen, and hopefully what will happen will be fabulous. We are going to have hopefully got a call. Guys at the back, are we loaded? Do we have connection? I don't want to introduce someone who's not connected. Are you all connected? Are you all now connected after the break? So, thank you. So, the next speaker is Bayo Akomolafe. Does anyone know Bayo? I mean, not personally, but do you like him? He can hear, by the way, just so he's online at the moment. Bayo's a globally recognized, I think probably because of his unconventional, counterintuitive, indigenous, I suppose, take on global issues in general, on the global crises, on pretty well every subject that we all discuss. And because he's so unconventional, you can imagine I really like him. And I have another guy in the front there, Stefan. He adores him. I mean, I like him, he adores him. And what I think Bayo's done, which I think is really critical, is really through his writing, through his book. Who's read These Wild Fences, These Wilds Behind the Fences? Anyone Beyond Fences? Who's read it? Thank you, Real. Oh, you're related. You have the same book, right? You passed it on. Yeah. So, but it's amazing, and I would highly recommend it. But what he's done, he's really made a sort of a paradigm shift in consciousness of how we actually tackle these issues, these global issues, from a very different perspective. Many of you know he's a poet, he's an international speaker, but it's a sort of a different approach. And we wanted him here really to demonstrate a different way of thinking about the future, a very, very different way of thinking about the future. So Bayo, if you can hear me.
I can.
Oh, look at that, Bayo. Thank you. So can we have him,
Excellent.
can we, oh, there he is. Hey man, how are you?
Hello.
Hey, Bayo, those guys at the back are really good, by the way.
Excellent.
So I'm gonna leave you with this audience. They're all throbbing to hear your words, right?
No, Derek, that's not exactly what I heard a while ago. Many people in that crowd do not like me, and I was promised that I was speaking with people that like me. So, what do you do about that? Hello, can you guys hear me? Am I still online? Hello?
We can all hear you, and we can all see
Excellent.
you.
Okay, I lost you for a second.
In fact, all the senses are really bubbling, okay? So go for it.
Okay. So I greet everyone. I cannot see you, I can only see myself. So this is hopefully not an exercise in reflection, but more in diffraction. I greet you. I'm in Lisbon at this moment. My home is in India. Oh, there you are. I can see everyone now. Please, can you just wave so that I can see that? There you go. I see Real. I saw Real wave first. And Stefan. Thank you for having me. So I would like to use slides. The guys at the back are the magicians. Can they put up my slides for me? Or do I have a way to share it from my computer? What do I do? Well, should I go ahead?
Can you share slides?
Yes, I can. But how do I do it so everyone sees it? That's the question.
I'll get you the full tech
Thank you.
version of this.
Thank you.
It's on a different
Those slides are pretty good. I
Can you
really
share
want
screen?
everyone to see it.
Can you?
Share screen.
Bayo, can you send me the slides?
Yes, it's been sent to you already.
Oh, okay. This
Yeah.
morning? Thank you. I will get them. You will have them now.
Okay.
Bayo, talk in the
Okay.
meantime. Just
I
talk in the
will.
meantime. Your slides will be up.
Okay.
You can do that. That's not a problem. We know.
I can. I can do it without slides as well. I just wanted to impress everyone. I'll just go for it then. So I greet you again. Yoruba people, where I come from, are very fond of greeting. And it's not just a way of producing social realities, it's a way of confirming our cosmologies, that bodies are relational and that we're indebted to each other. So I greet you profoundly. Like I said, I'm in Lisbon. My home is in India. I'm here for a couple of things. I'm a little bit exhausted, but I'm enlivened by this conversation. And to know some of my friends are in the crowd there. I titled what I would have to talk about chronofeminism, and I will dive into what that means in a bit. But I'll first start by telling a story that comes from the part of the world that I was raised in. First of all, to say this, that the Yoruba people, I wish I could ask how many of you are familiar with Yoruba literature or Yoruba philosophy. But even if I were to ask, I wouldn't get a response because I'm digitally distant from you in some way. But the Yoruba people have a conception of crossroads. Um, Y'all know Robert Johnson, right? The guy who uh, created our beautiful music, the blues, and with his guitar, uh, bedazzled the world. It's said that he got his guitar tuned by the devil at the crossroads, if I'm not mistaken. Well, the idea of the crossroads and the devil at the crossroads, I think, owes its legacies to the Yoruba people. They have a notion of the crossroads. We call it Orita. And Orita is where it's deeper than intersectionality. Orita is the idea that every body, human bodies, non human bodies, conceptual bodies, are diffractions. Nothing appears pure in the world. That is beyond seeking change and difference. We are already difference generators, if you will. So that in a sense, real is monstrous, as we all are. We are chimeric. We are composite beings. And I love that idea that there is nothing essential or universal at heart about what it means to be alive or embodied. That's the concept of the crossroads. So I want to play with the crossroads idea today, with especially, what in the literature is called speculative fabulations. Speculative fabulations are a way of fictionalizing fact and making fact more fictional, or making fiction more factual, if you will. So it's like playing and experimenting with the world. Well, I digress a bit. Eshu is the trickster in the Yoruba pantheon of gods, the trickster archetype, the one who is always playing, and through his play, the world becomes or comes into being. It's said that Eshu is the one that sits at the crossroads. He's the man of the crossroads. He holds agency in his hands at the crossroads. Eshu played a role in the transatlantic slave trade in the Middle Passage in the creolization of the Americas. There are many stories about issue. I'm not about to go into all of them right now. But what I do want to say about issue is how he disrupts time and how issue challenges the future, disturbs our accounts of the future. Um, Now, to say this other part, I would need to read out a poem. It's not exactly a poem in where I come from. It's called Oriki. And it's something, if I were to translate that to English, it would be something like praise poetry, right? In a sense, we don't really have names where I come from. We have Orikis. It's just that they're not convenient because they're long. So Eshu has his own Oriki. And I'll just read a bit out of it until I get to a part at the end, I believe, where something stands out that might be interesting to us. So this is an Oriki about Eshu that is found in the traditions, the literature, the Ifa traditions where I come from. Eshu turns right into wrong, wrong into right. When he is angry, he hits a stone until it bleeds. When he is angry, he sits on the skin of an ant. When he is angry, he weeps tears of blood. Eshu slept in the house, but the house was too small for him. Eshu slept on the veranda, but the veranda was too small for him. Eshu slept in a knot. At last he could stretch himself. Eshu walked through the groundnut farm. The tuft of his hair was just visible. If it had not been for his huge size, he would not be visible at all. Lying down, his head hits the roof. Standing up, he cannot look into the cooking pot. And the final words, he throws a stone today and kills a bird yesterday. End of Oriki. So Eshu, like Loki or whatever trickster in your traditions, think about the tricksters in your own traditions. Eshu is the disturbance of not just space and our habitual ways of perceiving and measuring bodies in space-time. He disappoints forward movement. He throws a stone today and hits a bird yesterday. And I find that to be not just ecstatic, but theoretically significant in how we pose questions about the future, especially now in our pandemic-infused, anthropogenic, anthropocentric, modern civilizational realities. We are faced with a kind of stuckness that invites trickster epistemologies, that invites us to resituate the ways we think about time. So let's play, just for a while.
Bayo,
Yes,
I have your slides up if you want to.
you do. Excellent.
Yeah, they're there. There we go.
Okay, put them up. Oh, goodness. I knew this would happen, that translating the slides to your systems would formulate or format the fonts. So guys, I'm not this boring. My fonts are more interesting than this, whatever is being presented to you. But we'll use this as it is.
Adjective group, Bayo. We'll put them into something each of us really loves, okay? Don't worry about it.
Okay, so can I navigate myself? Can I move forward and backward myself?
No.
Do I have
It has to
control?
be done by the tech people. Sorry.
So
Just say
okay.
next. Just say next or something.
And I was hoping not to say next. The
Oh,
whole
no,
purpose
I
of
know
my
you-
lecture is to disappoint the idea of
You're working
next.
with me, Bayo. You have to do as you're told. Come on.
All right, let's do it. So next. Next.
Oh, yeah. Next. Okay.
Okay, here we are. So I say that there's something theoretically fascinating about Eshu's propagations that disturbs our account of time, especially the unidirectionality of time, how we come to perceive time as always flowing forward, right? And I refer to the arrow of time. That conception came to us in 1927 by the astrophysicist Arthur Eddington, that time is asymmetrical. It doesn't go both ways, it goes forward. There's something inexorably, irresistibly obvious about this, that time always flows forward. And yet, issue throws a stone today and kills a bird yesterday. What are we invited to do with that? How can we think with that trickster notion of time doing other strange things? Especially in our vocation, in your vocation, I should specify, as futurists, as people interested in probability and anticipation and time. Next. This is just ironic. So here we go. So there is this assumption that the future is a universal constant and that we're heading towards the unrelenting production of nextness, like my slides. No, backwards, please. Please go back. Go back to the previous slide. Yes. So even the idea that space-time is material, Einstein's idea that time isn't transcendent, time is physical, if you will. Time is material, it can be stretched, it can be pulled, it can be manipulated, it's plastic. It doesn't seem to have made a major dent on the idea that the future is inevitable, right? It's like the star Polaris, the North Pole star. It doesn't rise, it doesn't set, it's just there. So it's like something about the future feels universal and constant and resolute. Next. So my question today is, can the future be delayed? Can it be cracked open? Can it be broken, shunted? Is the future inevitable? Or even if we say it's inevitable, do we attach its inevitability to the ways that our bodies are configured, the way that society is arranged? It's the inevitability of the future indebted to social configurations, ideological imperatives, more than just some transcendent idea of the future. Next. So, it has been suggested, and this is not new. Miller, my big brother there, speaks glowingly about futures literacy. And, from that corpus of ideas, there's this notion that the future doesn't exist as such. The future is an anticipatory stance, right? It's how we look, it's how we position our bodies. It's almost proprioceptive, right? It's how we navigate the thickness of the now, right? So much that we might say that now secretes the future. And this is really important because the stances we assume in the thick present has material effects on what becomes available for us. The way that Rio would say it is that the menu has other items on it. There's so much more on the menu. It's just the way we look that gives us the items of the menu or on the menu. So if future is anticipatory and is produced in the present, then it's really vital the stances we take. Now, in spite of this, the very notion of the future seems to resist that idea that the future is material, that it can be stretched, maybe even broken or stopped for a while. We're still committed to the idea that the future is out there. So what if we start to think of the future as a matter of immanence, as a matter of social configurations, oriented bodies, creaturely configurations, instead of something transcendent? I'm asking us to bring the future down to earth, humble it, compost it for a while. What if the future were about oriented bodies? And I want to tell this very brief story about this fungal entity called Ophiocodiceps unilateralis. I wish I could ask you if you've heard of this. If you've heard of it, you can nod as if, yeah, I've heard of this. And we'll leave it as it is. But the story of Ophiocodiceps, if you know a bit about sporulation and how um, some fungal communities under dire circumstances reproduce themselves, you might have heard of the zombie ant, right? And the zombie ant is an ant disease, you know, propagated by this fungus called Ophiocodiceps unilateralis. Uh, it gets into the head of an unassuming ant and literally directs the ant away from its colony, um, like a zombie. That's why it's called a zombie ant disease. It directs the ant away from its colony, pushing the ant to climb upwards to seek the light, right? And then the ant bites down on the larger vein of a leaf, using its mandibles and dies, all the while oriented and steered by this fungus that has infiltrated its brain. And then biologists notice that after a while, after the ant has died, something starts to grow out of the ant's head. Hence the idea of the zombie ant. So Ophiocodiceps is the idea that our bodies are oriented. It's a suggestion that we are not literal, liberal, humanist, traditionalist subjects. We are possessed, in a sense, possessed by other beings, possessed by things around us. And I wonder at this time, what if we are possessed by notions of the future that direct us to behave in the thick present that might foreclose or obscure other possibilities of being in the world as it is or as it might yet be? What if we are entranced by a fungal notion of the future? Next, please. So I think that the future is a social production, not a social construction. The social construction is limited to anthropocentric activities, human discourse, our language, the way we meet each other in society. But a social production brings in or expands the notion of society to include even fungus and furniture and light and elements and archetypes and trauma and loss, so that it's an assemblage, a multiple or myriad assemblage of bodies. I think that the future is a social arrangement. Just like the pandemic is not, does not point to a virus as a reductionistic entity, the pandemic is, an assemblage. It's the state, it's the pharmaceutical companies, it's how we have arranged work and time and play and the economy. That's the pandemic, not just a virus. The picture that a virus comes from without to infiltrate the within is another symptom of modern ways of seeing the world. But a virus is an assemblage, a rhizomatic tentacular being or becoming. In the same way, I think the future is a social production, is an assemblage. Speaking more to the ways we've arranged our bodies than something that is transcendent. Next, please. So, the future, and put in a question mark there. We make the future. I think we secrete the future. Not human bodies alone, like I've tried to emphasize. We make the future and it makes us too. The ways that we move in the world, the way the world moves us and shape-shifts us, we are constantly secreting a particular genre of temporality, the notion of the future. And I think we're enlisted in performing the future as a unidirectionality of time. But in doing so, these practices of what I might call coherencing the future have certain costs. What they do is that they also obscure other renegade temporalities, tantrums of time, if you will. If you've read a little bit of Walter Benjamin, he has the beautiful metaphor, figure of the angel of history, whose face is turned towards the past, right? And the angel's work is to stop the explosion that has led to history. He's trying to contain history and bring it back to a unity, so to speak. And this idea that time doesn't need to be conceived as moving forward is my offer today, or my contribution. Not exactly something novel, new, but hopefully emphasized as we move forward into the thick present. So the future has costs, and it usually obscures other temporalities. There are multiple temporalities, immigrant temporalities that are obscured by a flat notion of time, phallic notion of time, always pressing forward. And if you're the kind of person that needs science to justify that, you might look at some quantum experiments demonstrating that the second law of thermodynamics could be reversed at the microscopic level, at the quantum level. Not the microscopic, but the quantum level. And has been demonstrated. If we could go to the next slide, I'll just read something out from there, from that essay, or that report, that shows that the arrow of time is not an absolute concept, but a relative concept. This is from Eric Lutz, a theoretical physicist at the University of, I cannot pronounce that, in Germany. Now, different systems can have arrows of time that point in different directions. So that is renegade time. That time is a lot stranger than we think it is. And our absolute commitments to the future could be a form of possession, in the form that gods possess the adherents of candomblé in Brazil, for instance. It could be a form of possession, but possession has costs, right? While the arrow was apparently reversed for the two quantum particles the researchers studied, for example, the arrow pointed in its typical direction in the rest of the laboratory. That is, time is multi-directional. It could go in other unlanguageable ways that we do not know yet how to language, how to put into words. Next, please, as I wrap up. So this is then my idea of chronofeminism. I want to play with the idea that there are queer temporalities that move neither forward nor backward, but explore new directions in an open-ended indetermiverse. Right? Poetically want to challenge the idea of the universe, right? And go with Marcus Gabriel. Marcus Gabriel is a philosopher in Berlin. His idea that there is no world as such, right? Even imagination is a form of world in the world. So that the world, in a sense, is always indeterminate, always emergent, right? That the universe as a container or umbrella concept, with fixed in architectural temporalities like past, present, and future, is an obscuration of other playful temporalities. So I call it indetermiverse. And I call this general idea of queer temporalities chronofeminism. Next slide, please. So I coined this term to disappoint the imperial march from past to future, to say that we do not notice it all the time, but thinking of time as an arrow that flies forward, unrelenting in its pursuit of the next. It has material effects on how we think of ourselves, how we shape our lives, how we create society. I want to think of time as material, stretchy, breakable, tactile, tentacular, secreted from pores, not a transcendent arc towering over the realms. So in this time of urgency, let's get forward, let's go to the next, let's plan the future. The narrative of urgency, is purchased at the cost of other fugitive geographies. What some people like Fred Moulton, might call the black outdoors, a different notion of temporality that's about slowness, that is something maybe even about ancestrality. So the practice of commoning and gathering and studying these cracks in the tarmac and the highway of phallic time is what I call chronofeminism. Next, please. Chronofeminism is the bracketing of time, of phallic time. Now that we get into specifics, it's the localization, the defamiliarization of phallic time that allows the emergence of other temporalities where time does queer things and where queer things redo time, right? Next, please. And, just so we understand the consequences or the explosive possibilities of rethinking time this way, and what we're called to do with this, I want to refer you to this. I'm not going to read all of this. You guys probably have heard of the Tunguska event of 1908, somewhere in Russia. Um, I keep on referring to this because it happened on the birthday of my son, June 30th. No, he wasn't born in 1908. He was born in 2017. Um, and on June 30th, 2017. And I love to come back to the Tunguska event because it's said to be the largest event in recorded history, right? Many other events could have happened in prehistoric time, but in recorded history, it was the largest impact event, many times stronger than the Hiroshima bomb blast of 1945. But this happened, and beyond the specifics of it happening, people have been trying to figure out what exactly exploded. It was only recent of late that some scientists determined it was a meteor that exploded just above the surface. It didn't quite impact the planet, but it impacted in other ways. And I bring the Tunguska event to light for certain reasons. Next, please. To notice that we have had similar impacts. The pandemic was like a Tunguska event, massive in its dimensions. And in many senses, it disrupted time or our experience of time. I don't know how many of us are, already, felt time was slower or were so disoriented that when people ask what happened 2 years ago, we're not quite sure how to locate ourselves. Maybe because of the agency of the lockdowns. We don't know how to situate ourselves in time. We're only coming back to that idea of time as uniform. But the pandemic has been some kind of a Tunguska event, right? This tells me something else about what might be conceivable about temporalities. That a virus, for instance, might be conceived as prophecy. How I think of prophecy is not predicting the future, but unsettling forward movement. Prophecy is the invitation to look again at our circumstances. Just like the scientists went back to the site of the bomb blast or the Tunguska event and noticed that there were other things that could be generated from that site, right? Prophecy is the invitation to study. It's the transversality of temporalities. Next, please. So I think that prophecy is study, and futurology could be more about prophecy than probability or predicting the future through trends. It could situate itself in the anticipatory dance of bodies, as futures literacy tries to tease out. A future of politics can be committed to the unsettling of phallic time, tracing out the colonial legacies of unidirectionality because it is not universal. If we claim it's universal, then its universality has to be indebted to the displacement of minorities and their cosmologies. We want to be able to study the ways bodies become temporality generators and to seek out other commitments to seditious temporalities. What other ways can we organize our bodies and subjectivity so that other possibilities become, imaginable, intelligible, beyond just orienting ourselves along the linearity of the arrow of time? Next slide, please, and probably the final slide. So my question then is the future inevitable? What hold as it has this notion of phallic time on modern subjectivities and possibilities of change? What happens when forward movement is no longer possible? What ancestrality, is possible when we rethink time? Are we open then to the temporality shaping dynamics of intergenerational trauma and loss? And how does this disturb the binary of the next and the previous, querying their categoricity? Let me end with the next slide and a statement that I utter over and over again from the wisdom of my people. And the next slide, and the final one, that the times are urgent and we're being invited to slow down. Slow down. Maybe time is stretchy and material, but even more, maybe time can be cracked and broken open. I believe fervently that in those cracks of phallic time, we might find other ways of imagining movement. Maybe we're moving beyond forward movement and saying next, next, next. Maybe we're being invited to stay with the awkwardness of time. And that is where I'll end my spiel. Thank you.
Bayo back. Bayo,
Yeah.
can we ask questions?
Yes.
Time? Okay.
So long as I get to say next.
Yeah. Well, no, you can say next if you want to ask the question. Who's the next
Yeah.
person for the question? You can do that if it helps. So, questions, guys. I have 2 mics. Let's do it. Let's go around. Come on, who's brave enough to debate with Bayo? Come on, guys. Must be someone here.
Thank you for your talk. It was really inspiring. I have a question. You gave the example, 2 examples of what you call the chronofeminisms.
Yeah.
And both of them were external. One of them was the pandemic. The other one was a meteor. Can you give us an example of chronofeminism as a human practice?
Well, I think chronofeminism disturbs the boundaries of the human as well, because it derives from a post-humanist thesis, right? That we can no longer locate the human in the neat and convenient ways we're used to, right? But I understand deeply what you're saying about situating it within the human, except that I no longer know how to really think about the human as an exclusive or as an exclusivity. I think the Tunguska event was a human event, right? That meteors are human in a sense, just as the human is cosmic in another sense. But this is more of a call for us to continue to explore what a chronofeminism might grant us in terms of a politic, in terms of experimenting with social dynamics. Let me speak very briefly to the fugitive sciences. It's very unnerving hearing echoes of myself, but I'll go ahead, pressing forwards and awkwardly. To refer to the fugitive sciences of those 11 million people that were stolen from West Africa. This idea of fugitivity, I feel, is a chronofeminism. It's a disappointment of the masters or the plantation time. What they did, for instance, in creating candomblé and santeria and gayap and all these other forms of seditious spiritualities, was to hide, to engage subterfuge as a way of developing new societies. I think that was a chronofeminism because the plantation was all about developing forward temporalities. The fugitive temporalities were about digging in other directions. I feel that's a chronofeminism right there. If we study fugitivity and marronage and the slave practices under the noses of their masters, that's a chronofeminism right there.
Anyone else? Sorry.
Hello, Bayo. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you. Yes.
Hi, Casper speaking.
Hi, brother. Okay.
Here we are. Okay, so there are many ways in which the flow of time can be measured from a physical perspective. Half-life of plutonium, astronomical measures like, the time that it takes for a planet to circle around its star, many other, perhaps. don't you think that there is a risk because there are out there, exogenous to us, phenomena that do not voluntarily alter or measure or interact with time, but just happen in time, like, for instance, a given celestial body circling its star, or a given particle becoming something else, like in half-life of plutonium or other radioactive substances. So is it the case, to be provocative, like with the thermometer, if you don't like the temperature and it says 38 or 40 degrees, you can just throw it away and choose, you can choose not to accept, you can choose to go sideways in temperature. Say my temperature is no longer measured by the degrees Celsius or degrees Fahrenheit. I will find a different measure. But still, outside of our volition and outside of our agency, things happen as they had. It's of course a question of subjectivity and a question of position of subject in the universe. But I wonder if you looked at it in chronofeminism, to what extent it's an immanent thing, you just decide to do it, and to what extent it has the potential to impact the world outside. The world, yes, not just reality, but the world out there.
Right. Casper, it's good to see you again, brother. Definitely. Chronofeminism is Deleuzian in its emphasis on immanence, right? It's not the idea that anything goes. That's social constructivism. And that brings up questions about objectivity, and if there's a world that exists outside of our senses, and all of that representation of this crap. Sorry if your representation is out there. But the invitation of chronofeminism, borrowing from posthumanism, borrowing from Baradian agential realism, is that we are agentially tied to the world. We don't just make measurements willy-nilly. We are constrained by ecological, environmental factors to make temporalities in certain ways, to make measurements in certain ways. So that in a sense, to say that the future is universal is to obscure and flatten out the local imperatives, bodily, corporeal, biological imperatives, even elemental imperatives that are emergent and constantly experimental. I think that the future is, the way we have come to speak about the future, it represents some kind of ontological stuckness, I feel, that we're kind of incarcerated in certain ways of speaking and acting and doing and seeing and perceiving that really pushes away the other ways we can play with the world, right? So I really want to emphasize play. And this is the reason why I started out with the trickster, that the idea here is to play with objectivity, without dismissing accountability, right? We can conceive of objectivity in the Newtonian Cartesian sense, or we can think of objectivity as how our bodies are in, can I just make up a word here? Fidelitas relationships with the world around us, and how the world enacts imperatives upon us, so that we are always creating time differently. We are always secreting time. We may not have language for it right now. Like my previous brother asked a while ago, how does this become like a human thing? I don't know how to speak about it in human ways yet, because this is inquiry at the edges of a pandemic, at the edges of end time. But yet, I feel that this is an opportunity, a cracking open in the phallicness of forward movement that might afford us a way of situating ourselves in the ways we are already doing this shape-shifting, brother, right? So that's what the promise of chronofeminism is, an invitation to look again, an invitation to prophetic imagination, an invitation to the playful heart of futures literacy, to experiment with time and the future, and not just proliferate its form. seeking to characterize it with new content. I don't know if this answered your question, Casper. Your questions are usually keynotes.
Apparently, yes. Well done.
Okay, excellent.
Anyone else before we let Bayo go? One more, Bayo. Here it is.
Okay.
So thanks for the talk. Just very briefly, you mentioned phallic time on one of the slides. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on what that is for you with the unidirectionality? And maybe a bit more practically, how would you use chronofeminism to break away from phallic time, maybe with a specific method that you're using? Thanks.
Right. So I'm a recovering psychologist and trained a bit in some Freudian psychodynamics. I really don't want to bring out the phallus and its metaphoric significance here, except to just insist that anything phallological or phallic is constant and universal, maybe gendered in a masculine sense, in the sense in which Deleuze spoke about becoming woman, right, as a moving towards becoming instead of static being, right? So the phallic or phallic time is the constancy of a particular notion of time that has gained a dominant position in how we practice the world, right? Time is how we meet each other. Time is how we greet each other. Time is how we eat. Time is how we sense the world. Time is part of a sensorial apparatus, right? So all of this is time. I'm not thinking of time as something apart. I'm thinking of time as the worldly practices that we are always engaged in worlding the world. My spiel is that we seem to be stuck in worlding the world in ways that appeal to a notion of permanence and continuity at all costs. Think about the way the pandemic and our response to the pandemic is to get back to the normal. Think about the ways we pathologize the virus as an enemy from without, almost repeating or echoing George Bush's declaration of the end of the war, right? What was that thing he said again? The mission accomplished when he landed on that ship. It's mission accomplished. Let's get back to normal. I think all of these ideas and ideologies and conceptions are part of a particular proliferation of time as the movement at all costs towards a notion of the forward or the next. Right. So what does a chronofeminism bring? It must be seen as the aesthetic of the insensible, as the invitation to try out failure, try out demise, try out ways of situating ourselves in a way that is humble, try out staying with the trouble of the unknown and mystery, right? That we will not, that to know is to be imbricated in a world that is open-ended and teenage, never finished, right? So a chronofeminism, and the ways that I've learned to particularize it, and I'm working on particularizing it as a methodology, but not as a static methodology that can be adopted by some legacy institution, but more an invitation to stay with the trouble and for people to have local practices of cultivating new sensibilities. I call it making sanctuary, but that's another keynote. This one is about the questions. What does it do for you if we happened upon a notion that time is not entirely futural, that time is ancestral, that time is slushy, that time is circular, that time can be doing other things beyond what we're programmed to think it's doing. Stay with the question and see where it leads, brother. And that's probably my bit.
You need me?
A question?
No, thanks, Bayo.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
as you probably heard, they liked it.